Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to another episode of Islam for Europeans. I'm your host, Robert. Please like and subscribe to the channel. So I had an interesting conversation with a Muslim brother regarding, the Palestinian protests that have been taking place over the last 11 months. I mentioned that it's all about optics. Like we want to ask ourselves, why are we having these protests? Is it to appeal to the government, to the country we belong to get them to change their mind? Are we appealing to the general public? Is it just a way to vent? Is it just to show it, is there a religious motivation behind it? Or is it a combination of all those things? Now, if your goal is to, as most protests are, make awareness to the general public, you would think that optics, would be, something that you would care about, right? So I suggested that for these particular protests, that it shouldn't be an obligation, but it should be, I guess, recommended or at least a good idea to include the flag of the country that you're living in, right? And you see the other side do this as well. If you watch, protests on the pro-Israel side, they always, combine Israeli flags with Canadian flags. I live in Canada, and I was a couple of years ago. I think this was before October 7th. I saw a Palestinian protest. It was actually there were a bunch of like, like young 20-something Palestinians in cars. One guy was like hanging outside of his sunroof, waving the Palestinian flag. They were blocking traffic. And the bus driver, I was riding on the bus, was getting angry at this, saying, go back to your own country. And I think I only saw one family that had both a Palestinian flag and a Canadian flag, right? And I asked her, like this. I said, this is a good idea, like including this. She's like, yes, I know it's a good idea, but getting everyday Muslims to try to see, the appeal in that can be quite difficult. There are exceptions to this rule, and one big exception, I guess the only Western country that includes both the Palestinian flag and their national flag is Ireland. And Ireland's always been seen as like even though they're a Western country, opposed to colonialism. Ireland was occupied by the British for quite some time, and most of these protests are organized by the Irish public. You also see this in countries that have kind of no left-wing influence when it comes to the protest organizers, like Poland. Poland had a protest a couple of months ago, and they included the Polish flag. The reasoning behind what I'm saying, why this is a good idea is because, for this particular issue, it's very difficult for your average Westerner to understand, this very important, almost the most important issue of the 21st century. Um, you know, we spend a lot of our time on social media, um, as Muslims on Muslim Twitter, and many times we can you kind of get a skewed idea or an incorrect idea of what your average Westerner thinks about Muslims living in the West, the Palestinian Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and so on and so forth. So it can be very easy to falsely think that the vast majority of Westerners disagree with this. When in fact, when you look at polling in basically every Western country, the opposite is true. I saw one poll back in February 2024 that more Britons actually are on the pro-Palestinian side as opposed to the pro-Israeli side, and a vast majority of them want a ceasefire. Right, so you would think, if we should, like I guess appeal to that, given that the majority of non-Muslim Westerners are on our side, and your average Westerner is not going to go, when it comes to learning about Islam, they're not going to go to a mosque. When it comes to going to an open house, when it comes to going to a dawa booth, they're not going to go to a dawa booth. They may never watch a video, by one of, by a Muslim preacher online. They can, most of the time they get their messaging from basically what they see, visually, driving by a mosque, are they parked correctly? Is there garbage everywhere? Are they accommodating on the street? you know and when it comes to protests, they're probably not going to listen to what the people are saying in the protest, but driving by, they're definitely going to see that. And when they see that no one is carrying the national flag, it makes it appear as though that this is simply a foreign issue. Now, ceteris paribus, all things being equal, there is literally no reason why any non-Muslim Westerner should be supporting this conflict. I mean, the incredible humanitarian toll, just from a humanitarian perspective, is just absolutely awful. And anyone who's seen the raw footage, unless they have a completely, like a dark heart, they're going to be they are completely repulsed by this. And, we as Western converts, we know this because our whole family and our whole community is non-Muslim. And there are some people who simply don't want to see, uh, but there are also those who, can definitely see that this is completely unacceptable. And on top of that, there's also the financial toll, especially if you live in the United States, the billions upon billions of dollars that we give to fund, this war and this occupation. And not only that, but the amount of money that we have to fund for the surrounding countries, Egypt, Jordan, it's, and, the People's Party of Canada, for example, they will say, let's end all foreign aid. And they'll use this as this kind of like a talking point that most of the foreign aid goes to Muslim countries. But this is because they're trying to keep these populations down. It's supporting, puppet dictators. So, like there's an incredible amount of funding that is needed to keep this whole project alive, right? And, young, white Americans and white Canadians and just non-Muslim Westerners in general, who are younger, uh, they see that this is something that we definitely should not support. Because on top of that, not only that, but we're also being blamed for this. Like it's we're just, this whole project of ethnically cleansing an entire population is just basically seen as an arm of Western supremacy, right? So why would you want to support this project where you end up taking the brunt of the blame for this, on an individual basis? And on top of that, it has exacerbated the refugee crisis, right? And like when you look at protests, back like 2003, you know, we had the largest protest in world history at that time against the Iraq invasion. Tens of thousands of non-Muslim Westerners said, we don't support this war. They said, not in my name. And if you go back even further, the Vietnam War, um, Canada's, was totally opposed to the Vietnam War as well. Um, so it just seems like it's a no-brainer. I mean, like this is a good idea that including the flag of your national country included in these protests. It will endear your message to the people who are on the fence, who are neutral. Um, and like there's just the pros greatly outweigh the cons. I mean, it's I guess the reason why they never do this is maybe probably several fold. One reason why Palestinian protests don't do this in general is that they're organized by the left. Leftists are organizing these protests. They have a particular narrative, and that narrative is that the culprits behind this are basically not just our government, but just the West in general, right? And then on top of that, like it's very difficult for many Muslims to think that that this country's flag is not tied directly into colonialism and so on and so forth. um, you know Non-Muslim Westerners generally have this idea that the flag represents like freedom, and like a country that's that's worth fighting for, especially against your own government. So if you have a government that you don't like, you vote to get them out of there. And an American patriot once said, the greatest thing that a patriot can do is defend itself against its own government, right? So again, I'm not saying that this is an obligation, but definitely, in theory, it would be a great idea because you would endear more people to your message, which means that if you get more people on your side, fewer of them are going to vote for parties that political parties that support these ideas. Fewer of them are going to go to the marches on the other side. More of them are going to boycott businesses that support this ongoing genocide. But it doesn't fit the narrative of people on the left who organize these protests. And there are many Muslims that like who are directly involved in these kind of protests who actually agree with me, but it's just more of a general consensus that we don't do this thing, that we don't include the national flag, right? So changing a culture it takes a tremendous amount of effort and a cultural shift in order for that to happen. And the whole argument coming from the anti-Islam right is that these Muslims don't belong here. They don't see themselves as citizens of this country. So what you're basically saying is, the fact that I don't want this flag, in our protest, you're basically saying that you agree with them, that you don't see yourself as a Canadian, that you don't see yourself as a Briton, that you don't see yourself as an American, right? So, like I know this is, a very it could be a sore spot for many Muslims to talk about this idea. Um, because the whole narrative is around it's us versus them, that there's no one in the middle, no one on the fence that deserves appealing to or quote unquote appeasing to, because the vast majority of Westerners dislike us and they're part of the quote unquote far right. Um, and this is just a fallacy that has been exacerbated by staying on social media all the time, by not talking and interacting with everyday Westerners. And it's sad to see, and even many converts themselves, they don't really express these ideas. And I think they're afraid of rocking the boat. They're afraid of offending sensitivities of bored Muslim brothers and sisters. But I guess it is what it is. So and just in general, the optics of we basically a lot of these pro-Palestinian protests and movements, they have the opposite approach. Let's have the worst optics possible in trying to appeal to Westerners. I mean, I saw one, like a poster for like an event at like in the UK, and it was basically the title of the whole poster was watermelons versus coconuts. What does that mean? So the watermelon has generally been associated with, the pro-Palestinian side. So he's juxtaposing that with a coconut, basically. So what you're saying is that you're using the term coconut, and for those who don't know, a coconut is basically a term that many uh, Muslims use and people of color use, especially in the UK, to refer to someone who is basically brown on the outside and white on the inside. Right. So you're basically saying whiteness equals being, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, pro-Israel. Um, and it's just such terrible optics. I mean, like I said, a plurality of Britons now support the Palestinian side, so it's factually incorrect, and it's just basically a slur. You're basically saying, your skin color somehow, makes you automatically someone who hates us, someone who doesn't want us in our country. And if you're even a person of color, you know, who goes against the status quo, who believes things, that, most Muslims don't believe, then you yourself also are a coconut, right? Um, so, it's just the absolute worst optics possible that you can think of. And, I say this with love. I just spent so many nights in tears, basically over what has happened in the Holy Land. Um, it's a complete genocide. Our Muslim brothers and sisters, being torn limb by limb. It's an absolute massacre. And I say these things because I want these these protests to be successful. I want Westerners' hearts and minds to be changed for the better. And I know that most of the work I do on here is related to the work on Islam itself, but it's the Palestinian issue is tangentially related to that. Like how many more like people taking the Shahada, and how many more Westerners who agree with us on these positions, and how many more uh, white Westerners who go to your protest is it going to take before you realize that that we have most of the people on our side, and that the West isn't just represented by your Tommy Robinsons and your Piers Morgans. Uh, so I don't know. It's sad to see that like even after all the effort that has been putting into like this movement, that unfortunately won't translate into the ballot box, because all of our political parties are not going to listen to us, at least the major parties. But at least it will have like a mass effect on the hearts and minds of your average everyday Westerners, right? So in conclusion, it's a good idea. I don't expect the protest leadership to adopt this idea anytime soon. um, I guess they just can't see it. Like they don't do polling, they don't do focus groups on saying what is and what is not effective. And most either white converts or like white allies who are non-Muslim in the pro-Palestinian camp, um, they're not going to have the cojones to suggest something like this, because it goes against the status quo. I mean, the whole one of the most important aspects of critical race theory, which is adopted by the left, and even many non-left Muslims, I guess kind of subconsciously, is that one of the most evil things you can do as a white person who's like a white ally is centering white voices. And like it's almost like you're saying it's a zero sum game. Whatever's good for Westerners in general must uh, automatically mean that it's also bad for the Muslim community. Uh, so like it's just like this mindset that like that these people are always going to be in opposition to us, and we need to keep doing what we're doing. And like yeah, I mean, it just speaks for itself. I mean, people are not stupid. Westerners are not stupid. They could see, if they have any type of social media, what has been going on for the last 11 months, the absolute carnage, the images that have been burned and imprinted in our minds. And like and like I said, people in every single age group, from a European background, they're just they don't want this anymore. They don't want to be supporting this country. They don't want to be supporting it with weapons. They don't want to support them in spirit. And like if you're just going to be on social media all day as a Muslim living in the West, and just watching debates between Daniel Hikiju or whoever, debating hand-picked interlocutors who are going to be anti-Muslim, who are just trolling you, you're not going to see that attitudes have shifted in our favor. So that's my time for the day. Let me know what you think in the chat. And you may disagree with me. You may think Rob, like it's completely pointless. What is the point of having the national flag at these protests? We're not going to change their hearts and minds. Like this flag basically represents colonialism and everything that's wrong with the West. You're basically saying that these countries these countries and these people are basically irredeemable. So let me know what you think in the chat. I know not everyone's going to agree with me on this, but I tell it like it is. I'm not a yes man. So yeah, this is Rob from Islam for Europeans. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.